I recently had the privilege of catching William Friedkin's 1973 classic The Exorcist in cinemas for its 50th anniversary. I did this not only because it's an experience of a lifetime, but also in preparation for controversial director David Gordon Green's upcoming legacy sequel, The Exorcist Believer. Now, to the utter surprise of nobody, the original outclasses the sequel in almost every way. But what did shock me was by how much. First of all, this film reads exactly like it was made by people who had seen The Exorcist, loved The Exorcist, and wanted to make The Exorcist, but tragically misunderstands the entire point of all of it. There are constant comparisons being made and shot-for-shot sequences and references, but they all ring incredibly hollow when you realise that David Gordon Green fundamentally does not understand the original film. This was not a present issue in his Halloween trilogy because there aren't many fundamentals to Michael Myers or to Halloween. It's a fairly simple story with some lore that you can either take or leave in your interpretation. But with The Exorcist, there's a philosophy, there's a method, there's a style, and there's a code of conduct, and every single sequel to that original film, barring the third installment, has critically been misguided in all of those aspects. They all just take the parts that people loved and recontextualize them without understanding what makes them special in the first place. In my recent review of the 1973 classic on Substack for the Oscar Project, I talk about how the entire first half of the film is a character study, a drama even. The film is concerned with the characters of Regan, Father Karras and Father Merrin. There is little to no horror at all. You'd be forgiven for forgetting it was even supposed to be that. However, The Exorcist Believer gets spooky far too quickly. Jump scares come all too often and predictably. The characters, especially our main child duo, are severely underdeveloped, especially Catherine. One of the kids, Angela, gets a whole backstory along with her father and then a nice intro. And then we meet Catherine and spend all of 2 minutes with her before the possession scenes start to seep in. Angela's father, Tanner, is the most compelling character by a fair margin, but it feels redundant to even mention because saying you're the most developed character in this film is like claiming to be the most honest thief. Then we have the problem of the pointless side characters, and believe me, there are many. We have so many characters we're supposed to care about that all have shallow motivations and non-existent character traits beyond this one is a Christian, this one is a priest, this one wanted to be a nun. It's maddening how little is going on with the characters. When considering the first film is all about the characters, it isn't even really about the possession at all. This is one of the most striking misses on Green's behalf. Also, the plot to get possessed is so convoluted for no reason. They could have quite easily followed in the footsteps of the original and had Angela try to contact her mother through an Ouija board along with Catherine, giving the demon an excuse to pose as Angela's mother, which has the potential to give us some real character-driven moments. On top of this, we get similar shots to the original, like the flashing of the spirit inhabiting the girls, but this time around it is remarkably dull. They've completely Blumhoused these moments to be theatrical and overproduced compared to the small and simple but harrowing shots of Pazuzu, which are so toned down and effective you almost don't believe you saw them in the original. And the descent into possession is, as I mentioned, far too quick, and the result of this is me entirely not caring about the girls' fates, and worst of all, being astonishingly bored. They even take some of the most subtly eerie and unsettling moments in the original and rehash them in an exhaustingly worse way. Like for instance, the scene where Angela has a bedwetting accident. This is to reflect the moment where Regan pees herself at a party in front of her mother's guests. The bedwetting is far less impactful because the original scene is not about the loss of bladder control. That is the most surface level interpretation you could have, which is obviously what Green got from it. But the initial scene is a public display. This isn't a subtle moment of Regan losing herself. It's an overt demonstration of a bodily takeover. It is something so unlike Regan to do, and we know this because we've spent half of the movie with her. She is developed as a character, and she especially wouldn't do this in the presence of her mother's company. So this just comes across as so violently unsettling. It's also done while Regan is awake and conscious. It's almost as if she came down the stairs strictly to do this. this, but Angela isn't even conscious. She does it while sleeping. This doesn't come across as unsettling or as if something is wrong, it just kind of feels like a person wetting themselves. But I think the gravest mishandling of this sequel is the obvious mistreatment of its religious interpreters. The original film is named after Father Merrin and also slightly after Father Karras. It's just as much about them as it is about Reagan, honestly probably more so. However, the title The Exorcist is invalid here because we have a single priest we can follow and he's barely in the movie. He doesn't even perform the exorcism in the end, which is incredible to note when considering the major theme of the original was faith over religion, which is slightly touched on here as the priest abandoned his church to help with the exorcism, but the context is far less nuanced. It's a snap decision, it isn't lingered on, we don't see the conflict. Father Karras in the original tackled his faith the entire time. He was bouncing back and forth between losing his faith and regaining it, not through the church, but through Reagan. Through sheer desperate need he regains it, and this is what leads to his sacrifice, which not only brings about the film's resolution but also closes off his character arc. Here, the priest has no arc. There is no struggle, there is no development, there is nothing. If he were not present in the film at all and just entirely removed, it would not make a single ounce of difference. The film overall has nothing in common with the original it so cavalierly imitates, except a single piece of connective tissue with Chris McNeil, played once again by Ellen Burstyn, who goes through some of the harshest character assassination I have ever witnessed. Not only does this character seem to know things she should not have known, like the "help me" message written across Reagan's stomach, which is purposefully withheld from her as to not frighten her, and there's also this incredible moment where she blames the patriarchy for not allowing her to be present during her daughter's exorcism. It's just one of the most mind-blowing attempts to modernize a film's politics I have ever seen. I cannot begin to express how egregiously misguided this line is, and if it were not heard with my own ears and seen with my own eyes, I would not have believed it to be real. So to summarize so far, the characters have no arcs or personalities, the imagery is just soulless mimicry, the returning characters are butchered, the story has lost all its original meaning, and it's moved at a pace that is so sickeningly quick that if it were any faster there'd hardly be a movie to see. And this is all without mentioning things like the cinematography, which is so much less engaging than the original, which is of course iconic. Every sequence here is bland and dark, which speaks to this new horror technique of excessive low lights and shadows to create darkness instead of inventive and fun lighting choices, which make it difficult to see anything happening, and what you can see is incredibly ugly. The makeup is far less impressive and reduced, and the exorcism itself feels less intimate and powerful, nowhere near as intimidating. The demon is crude, like Pazuzu, but that's not all he was. Pazuzu was cheeky, even darkly humorous at times, but this demon doesn't seem to be having fun, which makes it far less sickening and uncomfortable. The scares are typical and generally unfrightening. The original doesn't need these huge and flashy tricks, contemporary cheats inspired by the Conjuring universe. It built natural tension and genuine terror. Story elements are handled lazily, like the daughters being dismissed from their mental hospital, which I'm sure would never be allowed to happen given their state. The resolution comes far too abruptly and gives us a twist you could see coming from the very opening moments. The film isn't without merit. There's one particular scene in a church that is notably quite original and fun, but it isn't enough to save the film from flying well below an average score. I read that David Gordon Green wishes that Friedkin had lived long enough to give his thoughts on this film, and in my opinion, if pneumonia hadn't taken away the brilliant director first, I'm sure this film would have done just the same. Consider Friedkin's passing a God-given mercy to Green, as this film strips away all the hard work the late Gray had put into the original film. There is no way this movie deserves or warrants a sequel, let alone a trilogy. The title of The Exorcist Believer not only makes no sense when returning the original title, as it holds no contextual weight, but the believer part makes just as little sense and is seemingly picked at random, which more than anything is representative of the filmmaking overall. But that's just me. Have you seen The Exorcist Believer? If so, let me know what you think. Let me know what you think of this video and whether it's a poorly handled legacy sequel to one of the greatest horror films ever made or not. As always, keep watching movies.